Hello,
Yeah,
good
I'm
morning.
in. Thank you. Now here is good afternoon.
It's good afternoon indeed to you,
In
sir.
Kenya.
Just
Yes.
making sure if your audio and video were okay from our side.
Yeah, very clear, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening. Thank you everyone for joining us on this day. I am joining you from New York, where the IMRF is in full swing. So the International Migration Review Forum is in full swing. And it has been some very exciting days, I think, from both sides of civil society, the sides of governments coming in, and also just around the different roundtables, the policy debate that took place yesterday for those who were joining. So just giving a bit of a flavor for those of us who are in New York, but great to also see that there are many that are joining side events such as this one today. And so very privileged to be the moderator for this session today. My name is Patty Sianga Knudsen, and I am one of the vice presidents from the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, also a migration governance expert that has been in the sector for a pretty while, and very glad to see my seniors here in the room and people that we have looked up to in the migration space, but also to see a lot of government officials that are joining this event. So this IMRF side event is entitled the Cross-Regional Collaboration between Africa and Arab regions to accelerate the Global Compact for Migration implementation. And it is being hosted by a number of organizations. If you have seen the poster, I'm sure you will see that we've got several governments that are here with us, and we will be hearing more from them. Very pleased to have the Republic of Malawi in the room with us, the government of Morocco, and the national government of Kenya that are joining us here today. And of course, it's being hosted by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, the International Organization for Migration, and sitting under the United Nations Network on Migration and the International Migration Review Forum. So quite a number of institutions, but also platforms that are going to sort of be the space in which we're going to host this event here today. So delighted to meet you. It's nice to see that people are interacting in the chat. So, just kicking off already from the start, just to let you know that we do have interpretation that is available. So you can click the button on my computer, it shows more, and then you find interpretation. And I think on others, it will just show that you have an interpretation button that leads you to choose the language of your choice. So there's interpretation in English, French, and Arabic. So you are welcome to click the language that suits you best to. I think also important and these can be found on the various links that have been shared for the invitation that led you here today. And also just to say that to the speakers, we kindly ask if it's possible for you to use your headset so that we can get interpretation coming in clearly, to speak probably much slower than I am speaking today, but really glad to have everyone here with us, and glad to see others joining in the room as well. There is the possibility, well, before I also go into some more housekeeping, very important that would like to announce the request for us to get consent from participants for us to record the session. And I think what will happen now is that a screen will probably pop up and you would have to tick a box that allows you to stay with us or asks you to, gives you the option not to partake in the event. But we're glad that you are clicking those buttons to stay here with us. Also to note that the questions that we are going to ask in our program for today, which I'll announce in a little bit, have been submitted upon registration because of the limited time that we have. So you are welcome to share your reflections and questions in the chat, but we cannot promise that we will be able to answer these. But in any case, it's good to see interactions and reflections. So please feel free, apart from telling us where you're joining from, please feel free to let us know what your reflections are coming out as our honorable guests are sharing, and as we will go into the panel discussion. Just a quick roundup of what our program looks like. We're soon going to open up with some opening remarks, and then we will go ahead and get some keynote speeches from 2 speakers. And then I will hand over to Dr. Ray Giuridini, who will moderate a panel discussion, a session that will run for about 40 minutes or so, a guided discussion to which we will be able to see a wrap up in the end. So in that guided discussion, but indeed through the reflections, we encourage interaction in the chat room, which we are monitoring very closely. And so without much further ado, I would like to hand over the floor and introduce His Excellency Mr. Alexander Muteshi, who is the Director General at the Directorate of Immigration Services, the Ministry of Interior and Coordination of the National Government of Kenya. And I invite you, sir, to open the event for us. Mr. Muteshi, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Just to start, Her Excellency Nancy Tembo, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Republic of Malawi. His Excellency Mr. Nasir Orita, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Royal Kingdom of Morocco. Antonio Vitorino, Director General, International Organization for Migration and Chair IRMF Policy Debate. The ECA Deputy Executive Secretary, Dr. Rola Dalshi, Under Secretary General, ESCWA Executive Secretary, Madam Tandie Mwape Bilatsen, Regional Head, Humanitarian Diplomacy and Liaison Support, ICRC, Professor Ibrahim Awad, Director, Center for Migration and Refugee Studies, School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, University of Cairo, honorable stakeholders and participants from the African and Arab regions, excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the government of the Republic of Kenya, I'm delighted to join you today on this side event happening on the backdrop of the International Migration Review Forum. I do thank IOM, our long-standing partner, the governments of Malawi, the Royal Kingdom of Morocco, and the technical teams for convening this timely discussion and for having extended the invitation to make my remarks on the cross-regional dimension of cooperation between Africa and the Arab regions. A couple of years ago, this discussion has been an agenda which has often resulted in the unanimous acknowledgement of the need to address the multiple challenges resulting from complex migration dynamics in our regions, and in an unanimous call for regional cooperation to that end. I would like to congratulate the government of Morocco for taking the lead and for championing the cause of regional cooperation on migration in the Arab region and beyond. I would also like to acknowledge the efforts of all the other states that continue to work together to advance regional dialogue and cooperation to manage migration and uphold the human rights of migrants. As the chair of the Kenya National Coordination Mechanism on Migration, a government-led interagency migration coordination mechanism, I do appreciate the importance of collaboration and cooperation in migration governance as articulated in the Global Compact on Migration, GCM. With roughly 1 out of every 7 people on the planet today being on the move, including some 281 million international migrants, there is a lot at stake given that the trend will continue and given also the imperative need to ensure that migration is humanly and responsibly managed. The Arab region has always been at the crossroads of migration as millions of migrants take the epic journeys and cross the Sub-Sahara and West Africa through the perilous sea, taking great risks, often with dramatic scenes and tragic outcomes. The 29,520 migrants arrivals through the Mediterranean in 2022, almost certainly a conservative estimate. The population flows within, into, and through the Arab region are complex and include both voluntary and forced migration, regular and irregular movements driven by a variety of economic, political, and environmental forces. Here, as in many other parts of the world, the search for gainful employment is a key factor driving migration. And while today it is widely recognized that labor migration contributes to economic growth and development, unless strong and effective mechanisms for its management are in place, it can also present security risks for states and individuals, including increased vulnerability of migrants. Indeed, migratory flows from the Horn of Africa through the Arab region to Europe and other destinations comprise an overwhelming majority of other diverse groups of migrants who can be particularly vulnerable: victims of trafficking, smuggled migrants, stranded migrants, unaccompanied minors, those subject to violence, including gender-based violence, and psychological distress and trauma during the migration process, and vulnerable individuals such as expectant women, children, and the elderly. These migration flows present particular challenges to states along the migratory route because the persons involved in these movements are more likely to be subject to hardship, human rights violations, and discrimination, and thus require special and individualized assistance as they fall outside the established international legal principles of non-refoulement and the international protection framework. Significant irregular migration flows in the region are a serious concern, as irregular migration in particular, its more corrosive forms of smuggling and trafficking remain connected with transnational organized crime. Furthermore, the competition and tensions over scarce resources and political instability in the wider region represent other critical challenges that will likely continue to trigger cross-border movements. So how can we manage such complex migration flows in a way that bring together the needs of the state with the protection of individual rights and freedoms? The two are certainly not mutually exclusive. There is, of course, no magic migration formula, nor one that is universally applicable. There is need to preserve the integrity of migration as mankind's oldest poverty reduction and development strategy, and along with it, the person's expectation that his/her rights as a person will not be affected by this decision and be honored and respected when they do migrate. That said, governments need to reconcile these various elements, design and implement creative solutions. Allow me to highlight three key elements that will need to be part of this solution in the region. A, combating irregular migration and all the challenges stemming from it remain a key priority in migration management in the whole world. The solutions here point toward better control and screening mechanisms, such as better and protection-sensitive border systems and more secure travel documents, as well as expanded cooperation on and capacity building of border officials and relevant institutions for care and return of irregular migrants who have no permission to remain. That said, ladies and gentlemen, combating irregular migration must go hand in hand with expanding safe pathways and channels for regular migration, creation of decent employment opportunities, and strengthening links between migration and development. C, trafficking in persons is another serious challenge for the region in terms of both scale and violation of human rights. Victims are deprived of basic rights such as the right to earn a wage and the right to free movement. We need to strengthen our efforts in regional cooperation and develop coordinated actions to address trafficking in persons and exploitation. To win this battle, such cooperative actions may include improvement of the legislative framework aimed at better regulating labor migration and fighting human trafficking. This brings me to the next key point, which cuts across the three priorities I've just outlined: the need to ensure adequate protection of the human rights of all migrants and the recognition of all of us that people do not lose any of those rights when they decide to leave their country of origin. Our collective responsibility requires paying particular attention to those made vulnerable by a myriad of circumstances and conditions, including trafficked persons, unaccompanied minors, refugees, asylum seekers, or returning migrants, to ensure that their needs are properly identified and they are provided with appropriate support and protection. Ladies and gentlemen, migration is a cross-border phenomenon. As such, it should be placed in a broader context of regional cooperation and regional policy developments. The rise in interstate cooperation and sustained dialogue we have witnessed over the past 2 decades, in particular at the regional level, and more recently at the interregional and global levels, is clear evidence that governments know that isolated positions and policies are no longer an option in today's world. Over the next couple of days, the International Migration Review Forum, states and various partners will discuss a variety of issues related to the protection of vulnerable migrants, as well as the ways to promote migration and curb irregular migration. I'm pleased that these exchanges will help build consensus and strengthen the platform for cooperation on this front. We are living in an increasingly interconnected and complex world, a world with more and more mobility, which brings new opportunities, but also increasingly complex challenges. It raises many questions, such as how to stem irregular migration while facilitating regular movements and strengthening migration and development links. The elephant in the room is how, for example, to ensure state security while protecting the human rights of migrants and preserving the asylum space. I'm confident that regional collaboration and dialogue is at least part of the answer to these questions. I'm hoping that today's proceedings are only the start of a longer-term dialogue among origin, transit, and destination countries, as well as the partners and other actors involved. I congratulate again the government of the Royal Kingdom of Morocco for leading the discussion. I look forward to today's deliberations, and I hope will lead to establishing a common platform and an agreed way forward. That's my humble pleasure to declare this engagement open. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Honorable, His Excellency, Mr. Alexander Muteshi, for those opening remarks. And in the interest of time, we are running late, so just to request our speakers as they were coming on to try and keep within a certain amount of time for the next part. And I would like now to introduce our first keynote speaker representing the government of Morocco, Mr. Ismail Chekori, who is the Director of Global Issues, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs under the African Cooperation and Moroccan Residence Abroad from the Kingdom of Morocco. Mr. Ismail, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Distinguished representatives, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a real pleasure to participate in this side event dedicated to 2 ways of strengthening cross-regional cooperation in the implementation of the GCM. Whereas the compact only exists through its implementation, the latter is only possible through a good understanding of the pathways of human mobility. In this regard, Morocco is particularly committed to the success of this side events. For his twice as concerned by dual Arab-African background, but above all, for Morocco had the privilege to host the intergovernmental meeting for the African Regional Review of the Pact hosted in September 2021 in collaboration with the United Nations Economic Community for Africa, IOM, and the United Nations Migration Network. Morocco also contributed actively to the first regional review conference on the implementation of the GCM in the Arab region in February 2021. And also for the pioneer initiation and involvement in cross-regional processes with European countries, such as 5+5 Mediterranean process and the Rabat process. Morocco underlined the importance to the implementation of the GCM. Alongside the participating states, Morocco has passed the test of assimilation by recalling the need for a coordinated, united, and sustainable approach in the 2 regions defined by normalcy of human movement, consecutive of the shared identity of these 2 regions of the world. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in fact, the commonalities between the 2 regions can only render cooperation fruitful. It is based on common findings that call for common measures, but it is also important to take into consideration the particular specificities of each region, and even more, to capture the cross sub-regions dynamics. The member states of both regions are indeed host, transit, and destination states. They all have a strong community residing outside their borders, which is essential for an economic, cultural, and scientific contribution, both through remittances and through the transfer of skills and experiences. They are also similarly confronted with some common challenges of security in nature, but in particular, climate change, structural inequalities, and an equitable distribution of the resources produced by our planet. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, aware of the challenges and of the relevance of the GCM, Morocco is driven by a triple duty toward the Arab world and African continent. Based on humanity, since 2013, Morocco has established a national immigration and asylum strategy and presented in the region. It is in its wake, the kingdom has conducted 2 regularization campaigns for more than 50,000 people from Africa, 95%, and Arab world, 5%. In the same way, the kingdom fulfilled its commitment during the pandemic by ensuring free vaccinations for all migrants, regardless of their legal status. Based on reliable information by hosting the African Migration Observatory, Morocco has formulated its African component in line with the first objective of collecting and utilizing accurate and disaggregated data as a basis for evidence-based policies. The observatory has a relevance for both regions and at the global level. Consolidated by cooperation, Morocco's approach toward the Arab and African regions aims to demystify the migration phenomenon and promote the development migration nexus in order to provide the conditions for effective migration governance. Mindful of the complexity of the human mobility, Morocco is involved in cross-regional processes with European countries. Allow me to share with you, ladies and gentlemen, some ideas having the objective of fostering regional efforts to the implementation of GCM. First, the importance to continue sharing experiences and good practices in the implementation of the objectives of the GCM. Second, the necessity to continue showcasing the importance of just, balanced, and fair partnership between countries of origin, transit, and host countries, taking into account the interests of all parties, far from logics of power, struggles, and conflicts of interest. Third, the expansion of the champion countries platform, especially the African and Arab countries. And lastly, the importance of giving more opportunities to existing cross-regional platforms involving countries from Europe. To conclude, Morocco does continue its collaboration with all stakeholders, playing a crucial role, and will continue to promote the exchange of good practices in a perpetual search of consistency and improvement. I thank you for your kind attention, and I thank all the speakers that preceded my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ismail, for those opening remarks from the Kingdom of Morocco. And now I have the pleasure to introduce Mr. John Kabange, who is coming from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from the Republic of Malawi, to give his remarks. Mr. Kabange, the floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator, and thank you everyone for this opportunity for Malawi to participate. I wish to indicate that our Honorable Minister of Homeland Security would have loved to be here to actually deliver these remarks, but due to some issues, she's unable to join us. Now, to start with, I think this is a very important topic, and my approach would be to outline the issues that Malawi has been doing at 3 levels. The first level will be at the national level. I will just talk about what we are doing on the national level. Then I'll also talk about how we have been engaging the Southern African member states who are also part of this important process of GCM implementation. And then finally, we will touch on an area where we must grow, which is now working together with the Middle East. So just very quickly, with the first part, I'll start with what we are doing as Malawi at the GCM level. We have been working towards having a migration policy, and we are almost at the very end of that process. And we have also been developing a labor migration policy, which we are also almost coming to the end of that process. And then we have had a diaspora engagement policy, which we need to review. It has been in operation for over 5 years. And these have actually been very important in bringing in very important insights on how we are able to leverage migration. And obviously, we have the issue of upgrading our immigration law, because we have our law has been very archaic since it's almost, and it hasn't, no major things have been done since independence. So we are really going to modernize it, bring it to the modern times, because I think it's so archaic. It's almost like the way it was just after independence, which is more like in the colonial times. Then we are looking at also working together. Now, I wanted to just indicate that we have had a very good relationship with the IOM. We are working together to try and build up on all these aspects with the support of IOM, both financially and with the expertise in all these areas. And we have got a very progressive refugee policy, and we are able to support refugees in Malawi and ensure that they are able to enjoy certain rights, and even making sure that they are able to get, for instance, during this COVID, they are able to get vaccines and things like that. Now, that said, that's on our national level. Probably just a very quick mention of the challenges that we still have. We still don't have a very coherent process of ensuring that we are able to have I think we are still struggling to have the mechanism which is helping us to look at migration in a holistic manner, and GCM for that matter. I think it's a process which some of our colleagues, like some of the stakeholders, they are yet to get on board with the whole heart to try and make sure that they are able to work with us. And so I think we are still growing in that area, and I'm hoping that we can continue to grow and ensure that things are working out for us. Now, on the regional level, we have been having some meetings working together as SADC. SADC does have some efforts to try and bring migration together, and it is very, like right now, it's too early to say that we have really made a lot of progress. But what we are hoping is that with this, because all the member states in Southern Africa are also members of the GCM, we can see that we'll be making a little bit of progress there. There's diaspora regional approach, which we want to have, and we want to ensure that we're able to do things in a collaborative manner. Then when it comes to this particular GCM, we actually had a review conference, which we hosted in April, just this April, of course, at very short notice, because we really wanted to have at least to ensure that we are all ready and we are all having the same ideas on GCM implementation. Malawi is intending to continue to build on this type of collaboration. We are looking at ensuring that we have a network of experts in migration in the southern region in the southern African region, so that they are able to share best practices and experiences, and going forward to just ensure that if you have a problem, you know who you can talk to. Most of our migration is within the region. So right now, it's always good to know that maybe if you have a problem with a migrant or some other challenge, you have someone you can talk to. I'm hoping that this particular process could be upgraded, where we would actually have like a digital platform and where we can be talking about migration, GCM implementation, and so forth. In this regard, we are intending to actually have an experts meeting again in June this year, just to have experts from all the SADC countries who are also doing the GCM to come together, share ideas, and see how best we can improve our implementation of the GCM. Finally, I will just touch very, very briefly on how we are engaging the Middle East. Unfortunately, at this point, I would say that there is a lot to be done. We haven't done a lot of work in this regard, but we have. We believe that as we continue to build, especially on the championship platform, I think we would be able to now just plug in and talk to fellow champions like we are doing now. Morocco is a very notable contributor in this process. Senegal has also done quite a lot, and so has Kenya, I think, and we are also doing our bit. So as we continue to have these conversations, we are hopeful that we would actually enhance this particular process of building networks. At this point, I believe that the critical thing is for us to have this type of engagement. There's a blessing in COVID-19. We are now becoming experts of, online interactions, and it becomes easy. You're breaking the physical barrier. You don't have to buy a ticket, and you have your meetings like this. So we are hoping that we can continue to build on these particular platforms and ensure that we are having bilateral agreements with the regions, and then continuing to share best practices. I do not want to spend a lot of time. This is a very exciting topic, but I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kamange, for those remarks. And indeed, that would end the keynote speeches that we have received from Republic of Malawi and the Kingdom of Morocco, in sharing not just what work has been done from the two governments, but also talking about, I think, new opportunities that we see with a lot of peer learning, and I think with a lot of a regional focus in terms of dealing with some of the migration challenges that we see, but also outlining some of the programs progress that has happened, particularly looking at the relations between Africa and the Arab region. So thank you very much for sharing in those remarks. And now we'll move to a very exciting part, yet another exciting part, one must say, of today's side event. And I would like to introduce the moderator for the panel discussion. So Dr. Ray Jurudini. He's the Professor of Migration and Human Rights and Ethics at the Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics in Qatar. And he will be moderating the next session with our panelists, and they're all in the house. So I will hand over directly in the interest of time. Dr. Ray, over to you on the panel.
Thank you very much, Patty. Thank you. My role is to introduce the panelists and to moderate what is a very stringent time restrictions for each speaker. But let me proceed without further ado. The panelists are Ms. Wen Li, the Director of the Department of International Cooperation and Partnerships for the International Organization for Migration. Ms. Edlam Yemeru, Director, Gender, Poverty and Social Policy Division for the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Ms. Sarah Salman, who's the Regional Advisor on Population Affairs for the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia. Mr. Mohammed Mokhaya, Regional Director for Africa, the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Professor Ibrahim Awad, Director for the Center for Migration and Refugee Studies at the American University in Cairo. And finally, Ms. Sarah Badr, who is the regional focal point for the MENA region of the Migration Working Group for the UN Major Group for Children and Youth. So we have a very distinguished panel, and it's going to begin with a brief statements from each of the panelists to the I have a number of questions, and I will direct the questions to particular panelists. There will be four questions, and then at the very end, each panelist will have 1 minute to draw a concluding remarks. So the question, each speaker should take no more than 2 minutes. It is a very challenging thing to do, but if I could implore upon you to keep to the time limit of 2 minutes, that would be much appreciated, because there is a deadline for at the end of this. So if I can direct the very first question to Ms. Wen Li, Ms. Edlam Yemeru, Ms. Sarah Salman, Mr. Mohammed Mahir, Dr. Ibrahim Awad. For those of you, this is the question. Can you please briefly elaborate your organization's role in the implementation of the GCM, and why, in your view, is cross-regional collaboration needed to further enhance the GCM implementation? So if we could go in the order that I mentioned, the IOM, ECA, ESQA, IFRC, CMRS. So Ms. Wen Li, could you begin? No more than 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. First, let me convey the regrets of our Director General, Mr. Vitorino, for not being able to join the session due to his role in the ongoing IMRF. In terms of IOM's role in supporting GCM implementation, actually we're playing a dual role. As the UN Migration Agency, we have been working to leverage our technical expertise and operational capacity to support states and stakeholders in implementing GCM through a wide range of programs. With a view to facilitating concrete progress in advancing GCM objectives in the next phase, following the IMRF Actually, we have identified 5 priority areas in line with our IOM strategic vision and SG's recommendations for IMRF. These 5 areas include enabling human mobility within resilient pandemic preparedness and responses, preventing further loss of life of migrants, addressing migration in the context of disaster climate change, achieving legal identity for all, and strengthening migrants and diaspora empowerment and contribution to development. At the same time, we are also playing the role as the coordinator of UN Migration Network, and we have been working to strive and ensure a whole of UN system approach to supporting the GCM implementation, working closely with the resident coordinator system and with the inclusion of stakeholders. In doing so, we work to ensure that the GCM and migration are integrated into relevant UN frameworks at regional, at country, regional, and global levels. And in African and Arab regions, more than 30 regional and national migration networks have been set up with IOM as the coordinator. And these networks, in collaboration with partners, support governments in aligning migration policies with GCM principles and objectives, strengthening capacity building, and organizing regional GCM reviews together with regional economic commissions. As previous speakers already mentioned, that international migration occurs both within regions and across regionally. So promoting coherence in policies and approaches across regions to address common challenges is critical to the implementation of GCM. In African and Arab regions, cross-regional cooperation is even more relevant, as the two regions have close cultural, economic, and social ties and a significant level of cross-regional mobility. And also the two regions share some similar priorities in the area of migration, including the need to improve labor market structures so as to create adequate job opportunities for unemployed or underemployed young people who may otherwise resort to unsafe migration. So to effectively address these opportunities challenges the two regions are facing, enhanced cross-regional coordination cooperation is essential. And as we are moving to the next phase of GCM implementation following the IMRF, we need to build on the progress made in national and regional implementation so far and put more focus on addressing the cross-regional dimension of migration in order to further advance GCM objectives.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Ms. Edlam for ECA.
Thank you, moderator, and thank you, distinguished representatives, dear colleagues, everyone here. I'll be very, very brief, conscious of time. So like other regional commissions of the United Nations, we at ECA support the regional monitoring and review of the GCM. So in 2021, we co-organized with partners, the African Union IOM, the Africa Regional Review of the GCM, which of course generated the inputs for the global deliberations that are happening right now in the context of the IMRF. So this is one of the roles that we play, of course, related to this within and beyond the GCM. We do facilitate using our convening powers. We do facilitate a lot of policy dialogue and engagement in the region around migration as a development agenda. But let me just briefly delve into one of the, I would say, important roles that we're playing as ECA is to truly link the migration question with current development priorities and frameworks in the continent. And one key example is, as you know, the African Continental Free Trade Area came into effect in 2021. It's considered to be one of the most transformative transitions that the African continent will undergo in terms of boosting trade within the region, manufacturing within the region, boosting growth and jobs, and so on and so forth. And so we as ECA are really trying to put migration, in particular labor mobility, at the heart and at the core of the implementation of the AFCFTA in the African region, looking at issues of, for example, skills portability, and really looking at how labor migration can be a foundation for increased regional trade and integration in Africa. Final area that I want to highlight is that we're doing a lot of work on data, which of course is a pervasive challenge across regions, across countries. And we as the Secretariat for the UN Statistical Commission and having an African Center for Statistics and a very close relationship
with statistical offices, we're doing quite a lot of work at the country level on migration data and statistics.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much for keeping to time. It's appreciated. Mr. Mohammed Mukhir, IFRC.
Hello, good afternoon or good morning. So I'm not Mohammed Mourier, as you may see.
Oh.
I'm the Deputy Regional Director, and I have to apologize on behalf of Mr. Mourier, who couldn't join the panel.
Sorry.
So I'm standing for him, and I will be quick as well for the benefit of time. So, first I want to thank you for inviting the IFRC to this event. As you know, the IFRC, through 192 national societies across the world, we have been pretty involved, of course, across the global compact on migrations process over the past years, and still a strong promoter of it, of course. What I could say to answer your question is that precisely the Red Cross Request Network has mostly focused its contribution, I would say, on assistance, protection, and advocacy. That have been the main point. And you may remember, for example, less than 1 year ago, this young Spanish Red Cross volunteers who was hugging a Senegalese migrant, which made the headline. We had a hashtag Stand with Luna this time, and that's the symbol of what the Red Cross Red Crescent is standing for. Basically, it's really this principle of humanity to ensure that migrants are not left alone or aside or left out of the loop. So that's, I would say, the number one principle we are following. It's to provide assistance, provide a presence, and accompany people on this journey as well, and ensure this space, humanitarian space, basically, across this journey. In addition to that, of course, we are looking more into a sort of structured approach when we do that, because it's clearly, especially in Africa, quite deep issues in many ways. If you look at the hunger crisis, for example, today we have a lot of displacements and migration coming from it in many parts of the country. So the approach is very much about a route-based approach, and that goes with the question on cross-border coordination. There is a strong contribution that can be made in that regard, because in addition to having Red Cross or Red Cross and national societies and volunteers, across these routes, we can also count on branches, very localized from both sides of the border. And we have experienced or experimented, I would say, what we call the humanitarian service points, enabling to provide services across this route-based approach on the migrants. And basically, there is certainly a sort of added value in that regard, due to the acceptance and the access of these Red Cross Red Crescent volunteers in communities, especially when you have situation of tension on the resources, and really to play a little bit this mediation role that could take place along this migration route. So these humanitarian services are pretty basic on health protection at large, but of course we are trying to look more and more into I think what is also a concern in terms of how we can be parts of the effort for social cohesion, especially looking at approach more focused on livelihoods and an inclusion approach. But I guess that will be another question. So over to you, Ray.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Pierre Kramer. And lastly, Dr. Brahim Awad, could you please address the question?
Thank you very much.
I think, Ray, you missed me, so just bringing that to your attention.
Oh, Sarah.
Sarah, go ahead, Sam.
I beg your pardon. Go ahead. Yes, go ahead. Brahim, you don't mind. My apologies.
Dr. Awad بالإذن, so
تفضلي, no problem.
معلش.
Okay, so why do we think that migration, cross-regional collaboration on migration is of an essence? Is two reasons. One is that no government on its own, or no region on its own, can govern migration. And second is numbers. And allow me here to point a few data points just to understand why the Arab region and Africa actually need to be better working together. In 2020, and this is the latest data that we have, in 2020, the Arab region hosted over 41 million migrants and refugees. Over 2 million of them came from non-Arab African countries. That's not accounting for Arab African countries. In terms of refugees in the Arab region, 1/3 registered with UNHCR came from non-Arab African countries. Meanwhile, 7% of migrants and refugees that left Arab countries actually went to non-Arab African countries. So the sheer size, I would say, is quite noticeable, and on its own is a reason for us to accelerate our work. Now, what is it that we do at ESCO and as a regional commission? We do 3 things. One is that we build knowledge. And here I'm happy to announce kind of a teaser that in 1 month, we will be releasing the 2021 edition of the Situation Report on International Migration, which we co-author with IOM and UNHCR, along with around 14 UN agencies. In the report, which Dr. Jaraydini and Dr. Awad, you're both familiar with, but the report, basically, we do offer updated data, at least what is available to us on migration, patterns, trends. We also offer policies and this issue is about building forward better for migration. So keep your eyes out for that one. So we work on building knowledge. The second thing that we do is we facilitate regional dialogue. And part of that, and as part of our mandate to conduct the regional GCM review, which we completed last year with GCM, the League of Arab States, and the regional network, UN Network on Migration, we try our best to bring together member states, different stakeholders together in panels such as this to discuss, deliberate, and explore challenges and solutions. So dialogue, and more dialogue, and it's always of essence in the issue of migration, particularly given its political sensitivity and all the thorny issues that require a lot of patience, openness, and transparency to address them. The third thing that we do is we work individually with member states based on their requests. We provide assistance, technical assistance. We are working with several Arab countries currently, either to develop situation analysis on migration and build knowledge on that, or to help them develop their migration policies as relevant. And we do liaise with the UN network on migration in those countries and try to our extent possible to ensure delivery as one UN. Also part of the regional dialogue that we do, we co-lead along with IOM, the League of Arab States, and ILO, the issue-based coalition on migration, which is kind of the bigger umbrella under which we do our work. And again, we try to the extent possible to deliver one voice and one message on an issue of importance such as migration. I think I'll stop here and over to you, Ray.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ibrahim.
Thank you very much, Ray. It's a pleasure to be on the panel that you're moderating and with all the panelists. I'm mindful of the time constraint and I'm mindful of the problem of the moderator. So,
thank you.
So in 2 words, collaboration, of course, is essential because migration is either within a region or between regions or sub-regions. So to govern migration, you need collaboration. In our case, it's not only about collaboration between the Arab region and the African region. In fact, for North Africa, this is intra-continental collaboration. North Africa is part of Africa, and therefore why, for instance, we have in CMRS, we have a project on a network of scholars on mixed migration in North Africa. Mixed migration coming from different other sub-regions of Africa to the North Africa sub-region and staying or trying or crossing the Mediterranean to Europe. So we are very part of Africa. As an academic institution, of course, what is it that we do? We do education. We do education, we do training. In our education, we have courses on migration and refugee movements in North Africa, which include migration from other sub-regions of Africa, African development. And we have students from other sub-regions from Africa, students from Nigeria, students from Tunisia, students from Ghana. We collaborate with other academic institutions in the continent, the Center of Migration Study, University of Ghana, in Wits University. So we are very much in in the region, collaborating within the academic world in the region. Let me just take 30 seconds, Ray, to say that we, in our work, we not only emphasize the GCM as an instrument of global governance of international migration, but we also use the objectives and the guidelines after the objectives in policymaking and in advocacy for policymaking in order to reach the objectives of safe, orderly, and regular migration. I stop here in order to leave some time to wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. I think it's very clear that the interregional, the fields of the two regions are of great importance. I think there's no doubt about that. And what needs to be done, of course, is to operationalize and to concretize those collaborations in due course. So let me go to the second question. The second question is only directed to Esquire. Sarah, you have another opportunity now. And ECA, Ms. Edlam Yemeru, and you have 2 minutes each. The question is this: one of the key common priority GCM objectives identified across the two regions is Objective 16, which is the purpose for this meeting, on empowering migrants to realize full inclusion and social cohesion. Why do you think that this objective is particularly important to your region? Sarah, could you begin?
Sure.
2 minutes.
Thank you. In 2 minutes, Ray. Objective 16 is of particular importance to our region, particularly given the enormous and largely unrealized potential of migrants to contribute to their development, both in their countries of origin and destination, unfortunately. And there are enormous gains to be reaped from empowering migrants to realize that full inclusion and social cohesion. In the GCM regional review that we conducted and the national voluntary GCM review reports, we noticed that only 5 out of 14 countries actually reported on this very important objective. So it's relatively underreported. And this is clearly something that needs to be addressed. What do we need to do? What is there to be done? A few recommendations that came out from the long review process, the review report, and other discussions that we've had. First, we need to actively promote social cohesion and build more accepting societies. We need to re-examine the existing policies and legislations that ensure that they are responsive to migrants, such as labor, education, and health policies. We need to amplify our efforts to ensure decent work for migrant workers and protect them from abuse. We have to eliminate gender-based discrimination against migrant women. We should find more inclusive and creative ways to capitalize on the skills of migrants. There have been some promising practices that we saw at least in our region, but there's a lot more that can be done. Thank you, and over to you, Ray.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very interesting. Now, Ms. Edlam.
Okay.
Where are you?
I'm here. Yes. So thanks. So I think on Objective 16, in the case of Africa, a high number of migrants are forced to leave Africa for different reasons. And we do know that some of those very reasons also exist in the destination countries, and the barriers that they face on this side, sometimes they face them on the other side. So attaining Objective 16 remains a daunting challenge. And for us in the African continent in particular, we recognize that full inclusion and social cohesion of migrants is the only way that we can maximize the development benefits of migration for the African continent, be it through remittances and other ways of development benefits for the continent. And as I would want to reemphasize again, for us as a continent, remittances account for a substantial amount of the financing for the Africa continent. So we take this very seriously, really, as a development financing agenda, and the social cohesion is part of, and the empowerment is part of that discussion and space. Of course, we have seen some progress in countries such as Morocco that have been emphasizing, promoting the inclusion of migrants and strengthening social cohesion. And we've seen other countries that have been launching community level events to promote cohesion between migrants and their host communities, both in the continent and beyond. Some progress, but we definitely must do more. And this is a big part of the discussion.
Thank you very much. Yes, I mean, one of the things that I find a bit difficult in this regard is this very concept of social cohesion, and what does it really mean? I mean, remittances is one thing, but I don't think, I mean, in the Gulf, for example, remittances is not an issue, but social cohesion, and if that includes the integration with citizens versus non-citizens, it's a problem. I don't see any way of bridging those barriers in this region, given the kind of structural circumstances that migrants and migrant labor exist in this region. But that's something that I think needs to be developed. And the idea of integration needs to be, I think, much better operationalized, but in a more realistic fashion, right? So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth. Let me move on to the next question, to Ibrahim and Mr. Pierre Kramer and Ms. Sarah Bader, if you are there. The question is this: from stakeholders' perspectives, what are some of the good practices witnessed with regards to empowering migrants to realize full inclusion and social cohesion? And you may want to question the idea of full inclusion, I mean, under certain circumstances. But please, Ibrahim, will you begin?
Thank you very much, Ray. I think you raised a very important point. I think it's not that, or at least we should not visualize this as realizing social inclusion, but as moving towards social inclusion. This is a movement, this is a progressive process that we hope will be realized fully at some point in time. So, for instance, you are aware, Ray, that at TMRS, our students help the refugees with language. You are aware that we have a project, in fact, for community interpretation to help the migrants in their relations with administration, in courts, so that to help them in the relationships with the society, with the host society. We have students who work on the insertion of migrants in the labor market of the host countries. The insertion of the employment is one of the best means of ensuring that there is progressive integration, not only in the labor market, but in the society at large, because you become part of societal processes. So I think that the question of the protection of migrants, we have, for instance, carried out a project on the entitlements of migrants in Egypt. You have different national groups of migrants that have different entitlements. And very often migrants are not aware of what their entitlements are. So we have come up with a large document, in fact, that detailing who is entitled to what, which will be accompanied with a communication initiative in order to sensitize the migrants to their different rights, and how they can be inserted in this host society. I would stop there.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Pierre.
Yes, thank you. Now, what we could say when we speak of a full inclusion, as you mentioned, or social cohesion, I believe there are different steps where the Red Cross Red Crescent as a potential positive contribution is more at the first phase, the level of acceptance, I would say, in the communities, the capacity to facilitate healing division between the host community and the guest community, I would say, or the migrants, and of course to try to also promote a positive image of the migrant. That's pretty essential. We had, I remember, a campaign in Tunisia, which was really much drawing on the tradition of hospitality of Tunisia and the positive image of the migrant, and of course to see to which extent the migrants can contribute and participate to the collectivity they are in. So in that regard, it would be more on the side of the advocacy, I would say, that we could play a role. But there have been some occurrences where we facilitate basically, more through a livelihoods program, the capacity to generate income and to be part of the community to a certain extent, even if it's a transit community. That would be the areas where we could play. But of course, the key point is really the level of acceptance upfront between the migrant communities and the host community. Over to you, Ray.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sara Badr.
Thank you, Ray, and thank you for the floor on behalf of myself and the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth, Migration Working Group, and representing and amplifying thousands of young migrants' voices from all across the MENA region. I want to highlight the major role that civil society plays in enabling inclusion and social cohesion, and in particular, the role of youth engagement in civil action as agents of change through youth-led NGOs that raises awareness about migrants and their rights and combats xenophobia. And so today I want to bring attention to 3 examples. I want to bring to light the work done by Migrants' Rights, which is a youth-led NGO in both Qatar and Kuwait that focuses on advancing the rights of migrant workers and changing attitudes and practices towards them through localized projects. And one project in particular, which is Insaniyat, which literally translates to humanities. It has achieved a change in attitude towards migrant domestic workers and encouraged steps taken towards promoting a more inclusive labor market. Another good practice from Jordan is a Global Voice for Autism, an NGO which supports migrant children with disabilities and autism to access educational opportunities, where youth organize community programs to train parents and teachers on how to ensure inclusive learning environments for individuals with special needs. And finally, a bit of an unconventional example and a good practice from the Global World Youth Forum in Egypt, which brought to light examples of young migrants' contribution to local society, especially African youth who are living in Egypt or elsewhere, which in terms changes the narratives about migrants and promotes acceptance of the other cultures. Over to you, Ray.
Thank you so much. That was a very, very, very interesting presentation on that. I really appreciate it. I think that one of the things that is going to be really particularly interesting are the examples and the stories of interventions and success stories as well as failures in the operationalization of this particular objective. Let us move on. We have really gone very much over time, so I'm not going to make any further comments, and then draw on each one of you, each one of the panelists, to just spend 1 minute with your concluding remarks on the recommendations, or let's say on one recommendation for the cross-regional collaboration that you would like to see ahead of the next regional review, if you could do that. So perhaps if I just begin, sorry, I've missed a question. Before we do that, let me ask Ms. Wen Li from IOM this question, Wen alone. How can the UN and specifically the IOM, as the coordinator of the network, work better together to enhance the member states and stakeholders with cross-regional cooperation, ensuring the empowerment of migrants to realize full inclusion and social cohesion, and particularly with the African Arab corridor?
Yeah, there are several things we could do together with our partners to support. We could strengthen the coordination among UN migration, different levels of UN migration networks to develop more coordinated approach in supporting dialogue and coordination between the two regions. This includes the support to champions in Arab and African regions to strengthen coordination and sharing experiences. And whenever possible, UN Migration Network could support the development of cross-regional programs and initiatives. And second, we could support states, particularly those that belong to both regions, to play a role of bridge in the dialogue and cooperation between the two regions. For instance, these states can participate in GCM regional reviews in both regions, and therefore can help ensure recommendations arising out of these two regional reviews are mutually reinforcing. And third, IOM as a close partner of many regional consultative processes can further encourage and support them to share experiences in cross-regional cooperation, particularly along the migratory corridors. And of course, IOM is also happy to support the coordination between regional organizations such as the AUC and the League of Arab States on migration issues, and work with ASCAWA and the ECA on these synergies.
Right. Thank you very much. You know, I'm struck by sometimes the difficulty of speaking about regions and regional cooperation, as we used to thinking more in terms of multilateralism and bilateral relations between nation states. Talking about these broader categories is I think, a real challenge. And let me now move to the concluding remarks for each of you. Can we, you know, begin with you, Ms. Wen, 1 minute in terms of giving one recommendation for cross-regional collaboration that you would like to see ahead of the next regional review?
Again, just to quickly, cross-regional cooperation is crucial. It may not be an easy task because stakeholder compared to regional level coordination, but it's something we must do. However, we are not starting from scratch. In many regions, regional organizations and regional consultative processes have already been engaged in this undertaking for many years. What we need would probably be to mobilize broader political, social, and technical support for this undertaking. So IOM, as the UN Migration Coordinator, is prepared to leverage our technical expertise and operational capacities to support this effort.
Right, excellent. Thank you very much. Ms. Edlam from ECA, your concluding remarks.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone for an interesting discussion. The key recommendation from our side would be to use data as a foundation for interregional cooperation. And we want to recommend that while we work on the global tracking systems and global data systems, and while we each develop in our regions regional databases and data systems, I think we need to look at the fluidity, the connections, and the integration there that would then help us to build coordination, better coordination and integration in policy terms as well. So I would want to recommend that we prioritize data integration, cross-regional fertilization within the global data efforts.
Thank you very much. Sarah Selman from ESQA, your concluding.
Ray, you mentioned it's difficult to have the regional coordination, cross-regional coordination happen. From our end, and I guess what the regional commissions can do with our convening power, we can bring that, we can provide that space for dialogue as ESCWA, as ECA, along with our partners, the UN global and regional and national networks. I think we can provide that space for experience sharing, peer learning, to advance basically not just the dialogue and the collaboration for implementing the GCM. And my colleague Edlam was just saying, how Africa's rather advanced maybe in terms of the data and data collection on migration, etc. That's something that we, for example, in the Arab region have a gap in, and we can see some good national examples and efforts. But if we are to speak at a regional level, then there's a lot to be learned, I think, in this regard. So that would be my recommendation. Thank you, and over.
Thank you. Mr. Pierre.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. But I would also consider that the existing platform could be further leveraged. Next week we have the African Union Head of States Humanitarian Summit taking place, where, of course, migration displacement is one of the key components. That's where this kind of conversation on cross-regional cooperation can also take place, because it includes 55 countries from Africa, North Africa included. So that's one area, which also includes sub-regional organization, which could be I would say, the natural convener of this conversation, where we would look for, and it's why we think, for example, that this humanitarian conference is crucial, is that there is one component about saving lives, definitely. The humanitarian essential principle should be there, which is along the journey, the migration corridors, and of course at sea, for example, where we operate. But there is a second component, and I will stop there, which is in terms of contingency planning. We can see today, again, with this hunger crisis, climate-induced crisis, we can anticipate displacements at bigger scale. And that's where, indeed, the capacity to provide technical support, data management, I fully second what has been said, needs to be considered as priority. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for stepping in. Professor Ibrahim Awad from CMRS, your concluding wish list.
Thank you very much, Ray. I think that we should further, as an academic institution, I think that we should further collaboration and cooperation between educational and research institutions in the different subregions of Africa and out of Africa as well. The academic institutions in the continent are familiar with the labor market conditions, with the demographic conditions in their countries, in the environment, the political environment, in international relations of the countries in their subregions, and therefore, if they complement each other, I think we can come up with good foundations for policies. In what respects CMRS in particular, we already contribute to work in the Africa region and in the Arab region, even beyond North Africa. We attend and contribute to efforts of the African Union and the League of Arab States, of ECA and of ESCWA. So we hope to continue that in the interests of the two regions.
Thank you very much. Indeed, much more academic collaboration, I think, is required. I agree with you entirely. Ms. Sarah from MGCY, have the last word.
Okay. For my concluding remarks, I want to keep stressing the importance of inclusion of youth and children's perspective throughout the GCM implementation. And with that in mind, a key youth recommendation is to call for better coordination between local authorities, NGOs, and governments. And this can be achieved either through fostering partnerships or echoing Ms. Salman's message through open channels of dialogue between the different in-country stakeholders. An excellent initiative would be perhaps to unite the efforts of civil society by forming an alliance of the different migrants-focused NGOs. in country. And only through a whole of society and whole of government approach, we can really achieve and accelerate the effective implementation of the GCM. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Well, thank you for each of the panelists in this conversation. And it's a pity that there wasn't time for broader discussion and questions and answers, but that's the way it is at the moment. And so it's my role now to just hand over to the floor back to the Master of Ceremonies.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ray and all the panelists. I think it's been quite a wealth of information to listen in. The beauty, I think, of side events, along as following other conversations around the GCM, is that you do get to see the complementarity between what, what the conversations within spaces like this, but the conversations actually that have been happening around the roundtables as well as the policy debates. So I think a very difficult task to wrap up after such a stellar panel. But I think it's been very interesting to listen in and hear how coordination remains essentially important all the way to pre-GCM days to where we're going. So looking really beyond the IMRF and what implementation looks like. So I think there is a lot of work around data collection that has been talked about, but rather also around the use of data for policy making. And the role of academic institutions has definitely been emphasized in there, but the role of different actors in terms of information gathering that is used for policy making. A lot has been said around mechanisms for full inclusion and social cohesion. I think I liked a statement that was made around full inclusion really being the only way to sustainable development. But I think that also around that space, what has been talked about is sort of re-examining, can we have the opportunity to having that relook? Are we looking all the way to education, labor policy, and some of the social policies that are there in cultures and societies in terms of reframing these to gear towards societies that actually have migrants in them, because we know migrants, and if I may add diaspora, are not going anywhere. They're an essential part of societies. Echoing a lot on the gender-based sensitivities, having this child, a very child-sensitive, gender-based approach, but also having much more inclusive ways in different policies. The role of civil society has been echoed by various speakers, and particularly looking at the role that youth actions have taken in advancing the rights of migrant workers and how they mobilize. So self-mobilization really being implored and coordination around that. And I think a question around, can we really humanize migrants? Can we move from seeing them as guests, a term that really should not be used, but looking at them as humans, as part of our society is essential for the community. In terms of collaboration, I think that this has been echoed. There's a lot that has been talked about in the use of the GCM as advocacy is being made for policy making, particularly in the region that is of the focus of today's discussion, but also talking about this level of acceptance that has to be engineered and worked into when we look at the migrant community and the host community, and really moving away from the perception of them and us and looking at much more inclusive societies. Very interesting to hear about dialogue. We require patience, we require openness and transparency, and that knowledge generation remains an essential part of it. But also coming back to continental agreements, regional agreements, how do we blend these in refocusing inclusion issues, but also in refocusing how migration is being looked at. Very interesting also as well to touch on some of the aspects that had to do with empowerment and not leaving out migrants when we talk about empowerment. And here I think chiming in also on the role of remittances, but a wide range of examples. I wanted to just say to the audience that has been joining us in the chat that it's been fantastic to hear from you. We've been watching it. Thank you very much for the many comments that have been made. And yes, indeed, national legislations are key to secure and protect the rights of migrants. We understand that social cohesion is a progressive cohesion which needs to go beyond migrants and communities living side by side, but really looking at multiculturalism as a real benefit for all of us, but also talking about this multi-sector stakeholder approach, trade unions, civil society, the young and the youth, international organizations, regional organizations and mechanisms, as well as champion countries of the GCM in trying to drive forward the agendas that are being laid down, even as the progress declaration will be looked at in a matter of a couple of hours. So very interesting. And then maybe just lastly, chiming in on that is the fact that, you know, the reviews remain essentially important. So let's look forward to what that looks like beyond the IMRF, but also I think a core that has been made predominantly from this space, but also collectively from civil society, is that we need a mutual accountability framework. And one of the things is to have just a much more solid monitoring framework around many of these things that obviously have to come and take, that have a very important place in conversations like this between Africa and the Arab region. It's been a fantastic time. We do not want to drag it out much more. We know that participants may want to be dropping out, some rushing to join the IMRF conversations, but also those who are joining online. It's been a pleasure to have all of you, and thank you again to the panelists who joined us, to our keynote speakers, and also to our guest speaker. Thank you very much, and have a good day, good afternoon, and good evening. Goodbye.
Thank you.